Life does not begin with freedom, it begins with chains. Before you even know your own name, before the will within you awakens to cry out, you are delivered into a system that teaches you not how to think, but how to obey. The tragedy is not that you are forced into labor, but that you are convinced to believe it is for your own good. This is the first deception, and it enters you before you can resist. That the walls of the classroom are the architecture of wisdom, when in truth they are the architecture of submission. We are told that school is where knowledge blooms, yet in reality, it is where thought is suffocated. A child does not learn wonder in those corridors. He learns to sit still when his body longs to move, to repeat words when his soul longs to question, to solve problems that have no meaning, so that he may later accept problems imposed upon him by others. What is called education is not the liberation of the mind, but its domestication. The wildness of the child, that raw spark of existence, is broken like the spirit of an animal tamed for labor. Imagine a young boy gazing at the sky, asking why the sun moves, why the bird sings, why the wind whispers. These questions, pure and trembling with life, are silenced when the teacher commands, "Pay attention to the lesson." The boy learns not to pursue his own wonder, but to abandon it in favor of the printed page. In that moment, a small death occurs. His desire to know is replaced with the obligation to remember. The flame is not extinguished all at once. It is slowly smothered under the weight of timetables, tests, and grades. School does not merely prepare you for the world, it conditions you to endure it. You are drilled into endurance, molded into usefulness, praised when you conform, punished when you resist. The so-called lessons of arithmetic and grammar are secondary. The true curriculum is obedience. To raise your hand before speaking, to sit in silence for hours, to swallow boredom like medicine, these are the first rehearsals for the deeper servitude of adulthood. Childhood is not protected in school. It is sacrificed on the altar of productivity. And what is the result? A man or woman who enters life not with a free mind, but with a conditioned one, trained to seek permission, to fear mistakes, to measure their worth in grades, salaries, and titles. The prison of adulthood is built upon the invisible prison of childhood. The desk becomes the office. The teacher becomes the boss. The report card becomes the paycheck. You believe you have escaped, yet the chains were soldered long ago. We speak often of trauma as sudden catastrophe, but there is another kind of trauma, the slow erosion of spirit, through repetition, conformity, and endless small humiliations. The trauma of being told, every day for years, that your worth depends on performance, that curiosity is valuable only when it fits the rubric, that silence is preferable to dissent. It is the trauma of becoming a stranger to your own thoughts. One day you wake and realize that you no longer know what you desire, because desire itself was trained out of you. The will, once feral and uncontainable, has been domesticated into a dull ache, a whisper lost beneath the commands of others. This is what school accomplishes, not enlightenment, but obedience, not growth, but diminishment, not freedom, but docility dressed in the language of success. And so I tell you this, school does not educate, it indoctrinates. It does not give you knowledge, it gives you conditioning. It is not a sanctuary of the mind, but the first factory of the soul. A child sits at a desk, restless, his legs aching to run. The sunlight outside flickers against the glass, a silent invitation to freedom. Yet he cannot move. He must endure the lesson, endure the monotony of numbers or names that mean nothing to him. He is told, this will matter one day. But what matters to him now is strangled in silence. His body screams with vitality, but he is rewarded only when he denies it. Thus, he learns the cruel paradox. To be praised, he must betray himself. And so, he complies. He learns to suppress his natural impulses, to sit still when he wants to leap, to repeat words he does not believe, to chase grades instead of truth. What is this but the rehearsal of adult life, where men suppress their rage at the office, where women smile when their souls ache, where all bow before the altar of duty? The child who is trained to deny himself becomes the adult who does not even remember what he has denied. Consider the story of Anna, a girl whose mind burned with questions. She once asked her teacher why the history book contained only the voices of kings and never the cries of those they ruled. Instead of applause for her insight, she received a reprimand. Stay with the lesson, do not deviate. In that moment, Anna learned the unspoken law. Truth is less important than obedience. She closed her mouth, she hid her wonder, and she wrote the essay that pleased the teacher. Years later, Anna works in an office. She is praised for her reliability, for her diligence, for her silence. Her childhood question still echoes in her, but she no longer asks it aloud. Or think of David, who loved to draw. His notebooks filled with creatures and landscapes his mind invented. But school did not want his visions. It wanted equations, spelling tests, and neat margins. His teacher scolded him, "Stop wasting time with doodles. Focus on real work." And so David abandoned his sketches, and with them, part of himself. Now he scrolls endlessly on glowing screens, consuming the images of others, never daring to create his own. The flame was not extinguished by chance. It was suffocated deliberately in the name of discipline. Here lies the paradox. School claims to protect the child from the pain of ignorance. But in shielding him from that natural struggle, the raw discomfort of searching, failing, and finding truth on his own, it inflicts a deeper wound. The child does not learn how to suffer fruitfully. He learns only how to obey. He avoids the pain of uncertainty, but inherits the greater suffering of never thinking freely. We humans flee from discomfort as if it were the enemy. Yet, it is this very avoidance that chains us most. The boy who is told never to question grows into the man who never doubts his prison. The girl who is taught to chase approval grows into the woman who cannot endure rejection, who measures her worth by the gaze of others. By avoiding the small pains of curiosity, of defiance, of true learning, we accept the far greater agony of living inauthentically. And still, we call this education. What irony that the schoolroom, presented as the cradle of thought, is where thought first dies. The institution of school is not an accident. It is not a benevolent gift from society to the child. It is the silent workshop where society forges its servants. Behind the blackboards and textbooks, there is a hidden blueprint, not for knowledge, but for conformity. The child is not asked, "Who are you? What burns within you?" The child is asked instead, "Can you fit the mold we have prepared?" Look closely, and you will see the structure. The bell rings, and all movement ceases. A herd is shuffled from one room to another, trained to respond not to their own rhythm, but to an external command. The schedule slices time into units, as if to prepare the child for a life where every hour is sold. Grades are assigned, not as measures of wisdom, but as currency of obedience. They reward memory, not thought, compliance, not originality. The classroom is the prototype of the factory. Rows of desks mirror rows of machines. The teacher's gaze mirrors the foreman's supervision. The test mirrors the performance review. The report card mirrors the paycheck. Childhood is not cultivated, it is harvested, converted into the raw material of labor. Do not believe the myth that this system exists for enlightenment. No, it exists to feed the machinery of society, to ensure that workers obey, that citizens comply, that no one dares question the order of things. It is not knowledge that threatens power, it is independent thought. Thus, school teaches you the opposite of philosophy. It does not teach you to ask why. It teaches you to accept because. The cruelest part is that it dresses itself in noble language. It speaks of preparing you for success, of teaching discipline, of building character. But this is mere camouflage. Success means submission to the rules of the game. Discipline means the erasure of your will. Character means the polished mask you wear, so that others may never glimpse the truth of your despair. And yet, most parents deliver their children willingly into the system, believing they are doing what is best. They too have been broken by it. They too were once children staring at the clock, longing for release. They learned that obedience earned survival, and so they passed the ritual on, like an inherited wound. The architecture of school is the architecture of society itself, a labyrinth where each generation teaches the next to mistake captivity for safety. And the deeper tragedy is this: by the time you are old enough to see the bars, you have already been trained to love them. What begins in the classroom does not end when the bell rings. It burrows inward, lodging itself in the psyche like a splinter that festers in silence. The child who was trained to sit still does not simply grow restless. He grows anxious in the presence of his own impulses. He mistrusts his own instincts, as if freedom itself were dangerous. And so, by adulthood, he is no longer chained by others, he is chained by himself. The mind becomes a battlefield of invisible demands. Do better, be faster, please them, do not fail. These commands echo in the silence of adulthood because they were first inscribed in the silence of the classroom. The result is a constant state of tension, as if the soul were always under examination, always waiting to be judged. This is why so many live in quiet dread, never sure if they have passed the test of existence. Consider the sleepless worker who stares at the ceiling, haunted by deadlines that carry no meaning beyond survival. His anxiety is not new, it is a continuation of childhood, when every forgotten homework assignment was treated like a crime. He does not know rest because rest was never allowed. He knows only performance. He drags the classroom into the office, the exam into his own bed. Or, think of the young woman who fears rejection so deeply that she never dares to reveal her true self. She learned this long ago, when the wrong answer brought ridicule, when a question outside the lesson brought silence. She carries this wound into every conversation, every relationship. Better to remain agreeable than to risk humiliation. Better to be silent than to be seen. And what of the countless adults who look successful, who smile in photographs, who repeat the rituals of social life yet beneath the surface feel nothing but emptiness? They followed every rule, passed every test, earned every approval, yet the prize is hollow. They possess diplomas, careers, and titles, but not themselves. What they lost in childhood cannot be restored by accolades. They are, in truth, exiles from their own essence. Here the paradox sharpens into cruelty. The system promises to prepare you for life, but in truth, it prepares you for despair. By sparing you the discomfort of true questioning, it condemns you to the torment of never knowing who you are. By insisting you avoid the pain of failure, it condemns you to the deeper pain of never daring to try. By training you to silence your doubts, it condemns you to the loneliness of never hearing your own voice. Depression is not always the sudden collapse of the spirit. Often, it is the long echo of childhood obedience. Anxiety is not always fear of the unknown. Often, it is the terror of breaking the invisible rules that were etched into you when you were too young to resist. We are not merely victims of society as adults. We are haunted children still sitting at the desk, still waiting for permission to live. The child enters the world with a raw will, a blind surge of striving that seeks expression in every direction. It is untamed, like a river before dams are built. But school is precisely the art of damming, slowing, diverting, constraining this primal current until it flows only through the narrow channels society approves. The tragedy is not that the will is stopped, but that it is reshaped to move against itself. At first, the child resists. He squirms, he rebels, he questions. But resistance is met with punishment, while surrender is met with reward. Slowly, he learns that the safest way to will is to will what others desire. He stops asking, "What do I want?" Instead, he asks, "What is expected of me?" In this subtle shift, freedom dies, not in one moment, but across 1,000 small capitulations. The conditioned will become a tyrant more brutal than any teacher or authority. It no longer needs the lash of punishment, for it carries the lash within itself. The grown man drives himself to exhaustion, not because anyone orders him, but because he cannot escape the demand implanted in childhood. Do more, be better. Do not disappoint. The grown woman hides her true desires, not because anyone silences her, but because she cannot silence the voice within that whispers. Stay safe, do not risk, obey. And so the will becomes divided, one part yearning for life, the other part crushing that yearning in the name of survival. This division is the root of so much human suffering. The man who drinks to quiet his anxiety is at war with the child inside who was never allowed to rest. The woman who sabotages her relationships is at war with the girl inside who was punished for honesty. We think these are adult problems, but they are merely the childhood desk carried into the adult soul. This distortion of will produces a peculiar emptiness. We work, we strive, we sacrifice, yet when we achieve the goal, it tastes of ash. Why? Because the will we followed was never ours. It was borrowed, conditioned, imposed. To achieve a goal that was never truly desired is to arrive nowhere. It is to climb a mountain, only to find the peak is hollow. From this emptiness arises the restless chase of adulthood, the endless pursuit of new titles, possessions, pleasures. Each achievement briefly masks the void, but the void remains. The will does not rest. Because it is not fulfilled, it is only exhausted. School did not teach us how to know ourselves, but only how to chase approval. And approval, once gained, evaporates like water in the desert. Thus the will becomes both master and slave, tormentor, and victim. It drives us endlessly, not toward liberation, but toward repetition. The same cycles of striving and disappointment, the same hunger dressed in different forms. And this cycle begins not in the marketplace or the office, but in the classroom, where the child first learned that worth is conditional and desire must be disciplined into obedience. Civilization itself is built upon these fractured wills, an edifice raised from the rubble of broken children. What appears as progress, industry, culture, and order is, at its core, nothing more than the organized suffering of countless souls bent into function. Every office tower is a monument to obedience. Every factory hums with the labor of those who once sat silently at their desks, learning to equate their value with productivity. The system does not merely survive on this, it requires it, like a parasite that cannot live without draining the host. The individual will, once fractured, becomes easier to harness. Men and women who doubt themselves, who mistrust their own instincts, who mistake compliance for virtue, these are the raw materials of society. Their restless striving feeds economies. Their fear of rejection feeds institutions. Their inability to stop feeds the engines of progress. What is praised as order and prosperity is in truth the exhaustion of billions who never had the chance to know themselves. Society celebrates this exhaustion. It calls it success. It decorates obedience with medals, diplomas, promotions. The child who once longed to escape the classroom grows into the adult who chains himself willingly to deadlines and meetings. He tells himself this is freedom because he chose it, forgetting that the very capacity to choose was conditioned long ago. He cannot see that the life he builds is not his own design, but the continuation of an ancient script written by institutions that thrive on submission. And yet, beneath the facade, the despair leaks through. Look at the faces on the morning train, pale, blank, already defeated before the day begins. Look at the hollow eyes of those who scroll endlessly through screens at night, unable to sit with themselves. These are not free beings. They are wounded children, disguised as adults, still carrying the silence of the classroom, still waiting for someone to tell them they have done well. Civilization thrives precisely because the individual does not. The suffering of the many is transmuted into the power of the few. The structure is self-perpetuating. Schools feed industries. Industries feed governments. Governments feed schools. The cycle turns endlessly, fueled by the quiet despair of those who were taught never to resist. And so the world grows more complex, more technological, more efficient, but never more humane. Progress is measured in machines, not in souls. This is why even the most advanced societies are saturated with emptiness, anxiety, and quiet misery. They mistake expansion for meaning, consumption for fulfillment, obedience for morality. They do not see that their entire architecture rests upon the mutilation of the will, generation after generation. What began with a child forced to sit at a desk ends with an entire civilization forced to kneel before its own illusions. And in this recognition, a darker truth emerges. The suffering is not an accident of the system, it is the foundation. Without broken wills, there would be no order, no economy, no progress. The very stability of civilization depends upon the quiet despair of its members. The greatest theft school commits is not of time, nor even of freedom, but of the mind's natural dignity. A child's thoughts arrive unbidden, wild and luminous, like sparks rising from a fire. But the classroom declares these sparks unworthy unless they can be shaped into answers that fit a rubric. Thought itself becomes currency valid only when it pleases authority. What was once a living flame becomes a dim lantern, carried through corridors where originality is forbidden. This destruction is subtle, for it cloaks itself in noble words. We are told that school teaches you how to think, but in truth, it teaches you how not to think, how to ignore the questions that burn, how to parrot what pleases the examiner, how to dress curiosity in the uniform of conformity. By the time the child leaves the institution, he no longer trusts his own intellect. He measures the worth of every idea against the imagined voice of the teacher, still lingering in his skull like a ghost. The mind becomes trained to recoil from itself. A young boy who once asked why, at every turn now hesitates before speaking, unsure if his question is valid. A young girl who once invented stories in the dirt now censors her imagination, fearing it will be called childish. The destruction is complete, not when the school silences the child, But when the child silences himself, this inner censorship follows him into adulthood, so that even in solitude he cannot escape it. He writes, but edits before the words are born. He dreams, but dismisses the dream as foolish before it can take shape. This is why so many adults struggle to think independently, to form judgments without leaning on the approval of others. It is not that they are incapable, it is that they were trained, year after year, to distrust their own minds. The greatest prison does not need walls. It only requires that its captives believe they are unfit to live outside it. School achieves this not with chains, but with constant comparison, constant judgment, constant grading. And thus, the paradox sharpens again. The very institution that claims to cultivate intelligence ensures that most minds never mature. It does not foster wisdom, but stunts it, leaving men and women brilliant at following instructions, but incapable of facing truth without guidance. They are educated to fear their own freedom of thought, as if thinking for themselves were dangerous, even shameful. The mind, once broken in childhood, rarely recovers. And this is the silent catastrophe. Not that children leave school ignorant, but that they leave alienated from their own capacity to think. They are taught to memorize the thoughts of others, but never to dwell in their own. They inherit knowledge without ownership, truths without understanding, and judgments without reflection. The spark of intellect remains buried, flickering beneath layers of obedience, waiting for a silence that never arrives. When the mind has been bent from the beginning, adulthood becomes a theater of distraction. Unable to rest in themselves, men and women fill their days with noise. The silence of thought, once natural to the child gazing at clouds or inventing stories, becomes unbearable. To sit quietly is to hear the faint echo of the questions once forbidden, the desires once mocked, the mind once silenced. So they drown it with endless screens, constant chatter, mechanical work, fleeting pleasures. Distraction becomes the opiate of the broken mind. The adult schooled in obedience does not seek truth, he seeks validation. He chooses beliefs not because they resonate with his inner voice, but because they are shared by the group. He defends them with vehemence, not from conviction, but from fear. For to stand alone in thought feels like disobedience, and disobedience still carries the taste of punishment. Thus, whole societies become seas of conformity, millions thinking alike not because it is true, but because it is safe. This conformity penetrates even the smallest acts. Fashion, opinion, entertainment, morality all are adopted like uniforms. The question is never, what do I believe? But, what must I say to belong? It is the classroom dynamic extended across an entire life. Speak when called upon, give the right answer, stay within the lines. Adulthood becomes nothing more than a continuation of the lesson. The grades replaced with approval, the teacher replaced with a faceless crowd. And when the crowd rewards conformity, it punishes silence. Those who retreat inward are called strange, antisocial, maladjusted. Yet what is truly maladjusted is the world itself, a world where the mind cannot breathe without justification, where distraction is celebrated as engagement, where constant noise is mistaken for life. The adult who avoids silence is not living more, he is living less, fleeing the only place where authenticity might appear. From this arises a peculiar exhaustion, not the exhaustion of physical labor, but the exhaustion of never being at rest with oneself. A society built on broken minds produces citizens who are constantly busy, constantly consuming, constantly running from themselves. And yet, beneath the frenzy, there is nothing, only the emptiness of a child who once longed to think freely and was told it was wrong. This is the afterlife of schooling, a humanity incapable of silence, terrified of solitude, desperate to be told what to think, what to do, what to want. Minds that might have flowered into philosophers, poets, visionaries, are instead reduced to mirrors, reflecting only what others expect to see. The tragedy of school is not confined to a single childhood. It breeds its own perpetuation. The child who learns to obey grows into the adult who demands obedience. He does not recognize his wounds. He mistakes them for virtues. He believes discipline is strength, silence is respect, conformity is safety. And so, when he becomes a parent, he delivers his own child into the same corridors, believing he is doing what must be done. What he suffered becomes what he defends. This is how the cycle maintains itself. The wound becomes invisible by being renamed as wisdom, The desk that suffocated curiosity is remembered as preparation for life. The exams that crushed individuality are rebranded as challenges that built character. Memory bends itself to justify suffering, because to admit the truth would be to reopen the wound. Thus, adults protect the very institutions that broke them, clinging to the belief that their pain had purpose. But the result is a generational chain. Each new child arrives with wonder, only to be bent into the same shape. Each new mind carries the possibility of freedom, only to be shackled under the same rituals. Parents, teachers, governments all conspire unconsciously to preserve the machinery. And so the cycle continues, not by cruelty alone, but by habit, by fear, by the blind repetition of the broken. The devastation is not simply that individuals lose themselves, it is that entire societies reproduce this loss endlessly. Humanity becomes a lineage of suppressed voices, where each generation hands down the same inheritance: mistrust of the self, obedience to authority, hunger for approval. And within this inheritance lies the quiet despair that saturates the modern age, a despair without origin, because its origin lies buried in the forgotten classrooms of childhood. Yet to see this truth is already to feel its weight lifting, for the cycle thrives only in blindness. The moment it is named, it begins to weaken. When one recognizes that much of one's thought is not truly one's own, but an echo of conditioning, a small crack appears in the structure. And through that crack, light enters. Not the light of hope, but the light of awareness, sharp, merciless, undeniable. You were told that school gave you knowledge, but what it truly gave you was fear. Fear of yourself, fear of your own thoughts, fear of the silence where truth lives. You were told it prepared you for life, but what it prepared you for was submission. You were told it built your character, but what it built was a mask, worn so long you forgot the face beneath it. The mind you carry now, the one that doubts itself, that trembles before authority, that clings to distraction to avoid its own depth, this mind was not born in you. It was manufactured. The factory was the classroom. The product is the obedient citizen, the compliant worker, the restless consumer. And you, without knowing it, were shaped into this product. This is why life feels hollow, why success rings empty, why even pleasure dissolves into dissatisfaction. You are not living as yourself. You are living as what was made of you. The chains of childhood have only changed their form. The bell has become the clock. The teacher has become the employer. The grade has become the paycheck. The punishment has become the slow erosion of your soul. Do not look away from this. Do not soften it with excuses. For only in seeing the truth does the spell weaken. Only in facing the discomfort does the illusion crack. The classroom still lingers in you, but it is not invincible. What was constructed can be dismantled. What was trained into you can be unlearned. The silence you once feared can be reclaimed as your own. But the price is high. To reclaim your mind, you must confront the abyss of not knowing who you are. You must endure the discomfort of thought without approval, of silence without distraction, of freedom without guidance. This is not pleasant, but it is real. And reality, however cruel, is worth more than the sweetest illusion. The truth is this: school destroyed your mind in childhood. It bent your will, silenced your voice, shackled your thought. But in seeing this, in daring to name it, you stand at the edge of something immense, the chance to live not as the obedient student, but as the untamed soul you were before the classroom claimed you. The world does not want this from you. It demands your obedience, your conformity, your silence. But the quiet rebellion begins in the simplest act: to think as yourself, to allow the forbidden question, to dwell in the discomfort that school taught you to fear. So face the silence. Let it burn. Let the old commands echo and dissolve. Reclaim the mind that was taken from you, not tomorrow, not in some imagined future, but now in this very breath. For only here, in the sharp clarity of discomfort, does authenticity begin. And beyond it, there is no lesson, no teacher, no grade, only the vast, unmeasured space of your own being. And here, at last, the lecture ends, not with comfort, but with the vanishing of illusion, like chalk dust fading into air after the blackboard is wiped clean.